We're going to cover the big three, which is where you're going to spend most of your money and which will likely comprise most of the weight of your pack. And so these are really important considerations. And so we're going to go through what you need to know in your decision-making process about what to purchase. So in general, we're going to cover two things. One is just the general considerations that go into your decision. What's important, what matters in those decisions. And then we're going to offer some specific recommendations for particular pieces of gear that we have confidence in. So in general, you want to consider four things. What is this gear for? What purpose does it serve? And then, of course, you don't want to carry more weight than you need, so you consider that. You also want it to last as long as you're going to be backpacking, and you don't want to break the bank. So we'll go over those and some other considerations as well. So we'll start with tents. And so function, generally you want it to protect you from the weather, obviously from the rain. But if you're going in the wintertime, it's also got to protect you from the snow. And those are different considerations because snow accumulates on a tent. People tend to think of tents as protecting them from wind and cold, but that's really not what they're for. You actually want some wind going through your tent to keep moisture from accumulating and condensing inside your tent. And tents are not good at keeping the cold out either. They don't have much insulation value. They don't act like a window, like a double pane window in your house. So you shouldn't be having components of a tent that works at cold. They're just not very good for that. You want other pieces of the gear to keep you warm. But you do want them to protect you from insects. In some places, that's the most important factor, is those mosquitoes just drive you nuts. And so any tent worth its salt has got to protect you from the mosquitoes and from ants as well. And then if you're going in a really sunny place where there's not a lot of trees, then you also would want some protection from the sun. And to a lesser extent, dirt and dust. It's nice to keep the dirt out of the inside of your tent so it's nice and clean. And then there are a number of other considerations. The size of it depends upon the number of occupants, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. That really matters. You need to think ahead about how many people you'll be putting in that tent. And that will be a major factor in your decision. And then the severity of weather that you expect. If you're going to be going in the winter time, then obviously you need to be prepared for snow. And really any season you need to be prepared for rain. And so those are the two main weather factors. Then of course weight, and we're going to talk more about weight. That's a big deal. And then of course cost, and we're going to have some specific recommendations from REI in particular, but you can get other stuff new online, and then you can get stuff used, and you can save a lot of money through eBay. There's a lot of stuff out there on eBay. Ease of setup matters. You had a long day, you're tired, or maybe it's raining, and it really helps to have a tent that's easy to set up. You should be able to set it up in 5 minutes. If you can't, then that's not a good tent for you. And then the floor area really matters, no matter how many people are in the tent. If they're tall or wide, you need a tent that's big enough to accommodate them, both laying down and sitting up. And then access, if there's more than one person, then you want at least 2 doors for access. That gives you more flexibility in how you set it up as well. And then it does also need to be durable, both the floor and the outside, with respect to abrasion primarily. But even it needs to be able to withstand a good stiff wind. And thankfully most tents are. And then its ability to mitigate condensation is really important because people breathe out about a pint of water a night uh, inside a tent. And so you have to have sufficient ventilation to keep that water from condensing on the inside of your tent and then dripping down on top of you. And then there are different types of tents. The tents used to be all double wall. They had an inner wall and then a rain fly, they called it. The rain fly's job was to trap the moisture, and then the inner wall kept you from contacting the condensation on the inside of the outer wall. But now a lot of tents are single wall. They just have good ventilation and they'll have some mosquito netting, but they're a lot lighter because of that. And then again, 3 or 4 seasons, depending on whether you want to go out in the wintertime. And then, of course, the number of people you accommodate. And then one big distinction is whether it's freestanding or you have to stake it out. There are advantages to freestanding because then you don't need stakes and you can pitch it just about anywhere. You can push it on a rock and you can move it around, and that's pretty nice. Staking is a bit more work, but you can have a tent that protects you a bit better from the elements if you stake it out.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
can you explain what you mean by freestanding?
Yeah, freestanding means you really don't need any stakes. It just has the poles and the tent, and you'll see examples of this, but yeah, you don't need any stakes. So you can pick it up and move it around and pitch it just about anywhere that's flat. Thanks for asking that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the material that the tent is made out of is really important. And there are 3 general classes of material. There's a polyester or nylon or ripstop. This generally it's just some sort of synthetic, and it has a coating of waterproof material that will keep the rain out. This generally the cheapest material. It's also the heaviest, and it's not as long lasting as the others. Steel nylon is a very popular material. It's nylon that is pregnated with silicone, and so it's going to wear really well. You can wash it and not worry about it losing its waterproof ability. It's lighter than polyester and is a reasonable value. Dyneema is the material that they use on $1-million racing yachts. It's extremely strong and light. It doesn't stretch like the nylon does. It's fantastic material for tents and packs, but it is also quite expensive. And I'll give one example of that here. And then footprints are a layer of material that a lot of people put underneath their tent to protect the floor. And so they'll add to the weight of your tent, but they will let it last longer. My feeling about footprints is, if you get a leak in the bottom of your tent, you can patch that with duct tape. I never use a footprint because it's just extra weight. Okay, so now Jay is going to talk about
quick question.
Oh, question, yeah.
Would you change your mind about footprints if you were in a more rocky environment like Arizona or New Mexico when you were backpacking?
I was in California, and I camped on rock, and I've never had a problem with leaking. And my floor it is a Dyneema fabric, so it's quite strong. But yeah, you can do that, and you can get a really thin layer of plastic to put underneath your tent if you're concerned about that, and particularly place with sharp rock that can help. but I generally don't, but you can. It's your choice. Okay. Any other questions on that? All right. So now Jay is going to talk about 4-season tents.
Steve, we got one last question.
Oh, okay.
What Dyneema tent do you use?
I have a Dyneema tent made by Z-Packs. Mine is called a Hexamid Solo. It's a one-person tent, and it weighs 16 ounces. So it's very light and very strong. And I used it on the Pacific Crest Trail. I don't list it as recommended just because it's kind of hard to get into. They make another tent out of Dyneema called a Duplex, something like Duplex, which I'm not recommending because REI has a similar design for a lot less. But if you want Dyneema, I would recommend and plan on using it enough to justify the higher cost. Yeah, I would recommend the Z-Packs Duplex. Particularly if there's two of you, then those are a pretty roomy tent. The Hexamid Solo is pretty small. Okay. Jay, take it away.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, as far as 4 Seasons tents go, that was the first tent I ever purchased outside of big group outings. And the reason I did that is because I do like snow camping and snowshoeing and backcountry skiing. One of the main differences between a 4-season tent and a 3-season tent is you can seal off all the mesh openings and let a little less air blow through it. Mind you, as Steve was saying earlier, you should probably still have the vents open. That way you can still get fresh air and it reduces condensation. The other thing about 4-season tents is the main frame of it is typically a freestanding tent, meaning it does not need to be staked down to be set up. But usually the ends of the rain flies do need to be staked down. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a picture of the yellow and gray tent. And the end that's farthest right, that's generally the end that would be staked down. And that's a vestibule where you can set your packs are.
Hey, Jay,
Yes.
quick, this is Danette. Are you holding your mic?
Yeah, hold it off to the side.
Yeah, some of your, I just wanted to jump in real quick because is anybody else hearing that noise?
Yeah, it's got to
Okay.
be off to the side.
Yeah, just you're a little bit too close to it or something. Just wanted to jump in before you kept going. Try it again. Breaker 19. You're muted now.
Got a better distance right there.
That's good.
Keep going. That sounds better.
Okay. So as far as staking it down, just the vestibule itself has to be done. And they're probably also going to be the most expensive tent that you can buy and the heaviest. This tent says it's 9 pounds. I have one that's made by Mountain Hardware that's about 6 pounds, and it's a very tight 2-person tent. And by the time you have your gear inside of it, there's not much room to move around in it. And also the headroom in a 4-season tent is generally much lower. All you're doing in that is staying the night or changing clothes. And do you have anything you want to add to that, Steve?
No, and well, one reason they're heavy, of course, they have extra sets of poles to carry the load. I mean, you can get 2 feet of snow in a night, and so you need to really have a strong tent to hold the snow and to deal with probably higher winds as well.
Yes, and I have been in conditions where it has had 2 to 3 feet of snow on top of the tent before, and the ceiling definitely comes in towards you, but you can get off in the morning and shake it off. And also going back on what Steve was saying earlier is I don't use a footprint on these while snow camping either because there's nothing really for it to grind into, and duct tape's a great way to patch it. I haven't had to do it to a 4-season, but have done it to a 3-season before.
Okay, shall we go on? All right. So let's talk about freestanding tents. I have a few examples here. The MSR Hubba Hubba is A good, fairly roomy tent, weighs 3.5 pounds. Fairly expensive. You see it has mosquito netting in the upper part, so it has pretty good ventilation, and then it has this outer covering rainfly. So it has pretty good ventilation and not too heavy of a tent. And then other tent I would recommend is a freestanding tent is the REI Quarter Dome. Generally, the REI brands are a good value. So this Quarter Dome 2-person tent weighs only 40 ounces, and it has entry on both sides. They call it double wall. It has mosquito netting in there. I'm not sure what double wall means, but it's quite a lot cheaper than the MSR, as well as lighter. So that's a good tent. You also see the shape of it. It has, looks like a lot of headroom in there as well. And then there are ultralight tents that have different designs and are quite a lot lighter. So the REI Flash Air is the new tent from REI. There's a 1-person and 2-person tents. So they weigh 20 and 31 ounces respectively, and very reasonably priced. They are that light because the 2 poles that it uses are your hiking poles. They do also provide poles that you can use separately, but if you're using hiking poles, then you don't need to carry extra poles for that tent. And those weights are without those extra poles. So it does have stakes out, so that's part of the weight. But it's a very efficient design, and I think these are made of sil nylon, I think, and a very reasonable price. At the other extreme is the Big Agnes Fly Creek Carbon Dyneema. So obviously it is made of Dyneema fabric, and the poles are made of carbon fiber. And so it only weighs 16 ounces for the 1-person and 18 ounces for the 2-person tent. What you see is what you get there. There's no outer layer there. That's the tent. I'm not sure about breathability, but it's obviously a very expensive tent. So if all you care about is weight and you have loads of money, you can get that tent. As I said, I use a Z-Pax Hexamid Solo. It's carbon. It's a Dyneema fabric. And then there's also the Z-Pax Duplex, which is the same design really as this Flash Air. Now, Big Agnes also has a Fly Creek that is made of, I think, sil nylon. It's much more reasonably priced, and it weighs about the same amount as the Flash Air 2. So that's another option. Same design as the Fly Creek Carbon Dyneema. And the tent I have is an earlier version of this tarp tent. Tarp tent is, I think it's based in Portland, maybe it's Northern California, but this model is very reasonably priced, plenty of room for 2 people, and weighs 36 ounces. I've had this tent for quite a while, and I really like it. It just weighs more than my Z-Pax tent, but it's a great 2-person tent at a good price. It has that bathtub design and good ventilation, so condensation is really not much of an issue. So I think that's it on tents. Any questions on tents at this point?
Steve, that looks like it, Shelley's asking, it looks like it's raised a bit above the ground. Is that true, or is it just a?
Yeah, so yeah, the floor is tied by mosquito netting to the fly, and the fly is held up by that hiking pole primarily, and there's a pole on the back too. And so yeah, the floor is sort of suspended there, and of course you put your bag in there, and it creates a nice bathtub effect. They did a really nice job of pitching that tent. It doesn't look that nice when I pitch it.
That's great. Thank you.
Steve, can you elaborate on using your trekking poles as a tent poles?
Yeah, trekking poles, you want your trekking pole to be adjustable so you can accommodate different situations where it might need to vary a little bit in height. And there is some flexibility in how high you make that. But my tent I use on the PCT just requires one hiking pole as well. But I always carry two because I never trusted whether my trekking pole was going to go out on me. So I always carry two.
Steve, what would you recommend for bivy camping? If you're bringing a bivy, would you bring a tarp as well?
I've never done bivy camping. Can you speak to your experience with that, Casey?
And can you explain what that is, Casey? Thanks.
Yeah, so a bivy or a bivouac sack, maybe, is kind of like a waterproof outer covering for your sleeping bag. It's the same like shape as your sleeping bag, but it's going to be a waterproof, sometimes breathable layer that you put just straight on the ground. You put your sleeping bag inside, so you don't have a tent or anything like that. And some of them don't even come with bug netting. It'll just be your waterproof layer. They're lighter. They're most often used in rock climbing or mountaineering applications. Most of the times, especially depending on how much money you want to spend, you can get about the same weight of tent in you can get the same weight in a tent instead of a bivy, so you get better performance overall.
So Casey, how does that work in the rain? If, I mean, you do need to be able to breathe and have access to air. So how does that work?
Well, so my bivy that I've used, I primarily use the Army issue bivy, but it just has a flap, and so it's not 100% sealed all the way around, but there is a little overhang by your head, so there will be gaps in the air.
And does you ever have a problem with condensation just from your body giving off vapor?
I did not when I was, not normally.
Okay.
No, not normally. The Army, it was all 3-layer Gore-Tex, so it actually vented pretty well.
Oh, nice.
Some of the more, I know there's some Dyneema bivvies out there and other fabric bivvies, and they might have more condensation issues.
Okay.
You don't need a tarp, but it's definitely nice to have a tarp above your bivvy so that if it is raining, you do have a little bit of, you can actually move around with that instead of just being like snugged up in your sleeping bag and you're snugged up in your bivvy all night long.